We had enough LSD to take it about twice a month. Sadie said that Charlie was trying to talk her out of it. She understood his concern, she said, but she didn't believe acid did harm, even to unborn babies. I had no opinion to offer. Sadie always did what she wanted to do anyway. Cappy wrote a whole story about the night that Sadie let Zizo in the house, but in the succeeding years, I lost most of the pages. The story began early one morning at the farmhouse. The sun was up and already getting high as Sadie and I surveyed the cloakroom for appropriate costumes, including a cowboy shirt that buttoned snugly around her belly. Then we danced up the dusty trail to visit George. "Who bees it?" he inquired in his Irish mountain drawl. It landed a kiss on his cheek as Sadie called, "It bees us guys." He chuckled. "I didn't know that was you walking in behind that belly. How bees us guy this morning?" Standing in front of him, Sadie held one of his hands on the other guy. "Maybe he wants out of there," George suggested. "Why not leave him in there? He'll be in good hands. Perhaps you could go dancing or horseback riding." Sadie says she found it impossible to go anywhere without him, to which George replied, pouting, "Well, how am I supposed to know? Nobody ever tells me nothing." We strolled on down to the office to sign up a few riders, but Sadie didn't want to stay. At the ranch house that evening, she sat in the circle with her hand on her belly. Suddenly, she said, "Whoa, I'm gonna have this critter tonight." Nobody paid Sadie much mind because it was 2 months too early, and because it was Sadie. We passed the bowls, hungry and interested in other topics. When Sadie said she didn't want to eat, it raised a few eyebrows. And when she left to lie down in the next room, it wrinkled a few more. A couple of the girls went into the bedroom and came out looking expectant. Then everyone went into action, even the ones who didn't know what to do. Someone brought fresh towels, soap, and a wash basin to Sadie's side. The men paced in and out of the room. The women washed their hands and arms with alcohol, and discovering just half a bottle, sent 3 people to the store. Some of the girls wanted to change the bed sheets. Charlie asked for something clean to wear. Brenda handed him a patchwork shirt she had just finished making, and he suggested Sadie get up and go boil some water. Sadie got herself up and went straight to the task. The bed sheets got changed, and when she returned, carefully carrying the hot water, she laid herself down with a sigh and another painful contraction. Her groans and the stillness between them were unsettling. No one was prepared for this. More sobering was Charlie's unfolding of a towel, revealing a razor blade like he'd used on Mary. When Mary was far into labor, Charlie had made a small incision in her perineum. I didn't know how he knew about the episiotomy. The procedure is sometimes done by obstetricians to prevent vaginal tearing because torn tissue, being jagged, heals unevenly, causing scar tissue, loss of elasticity, and further damage with subsequent births. At the foot of Sadie's bed, Charlie poured alcohol over his hands and the blade. He folded a clean towel and draped it over his neck. Then he inserted the blade into a hand razor, picked up a mirror, and, with the soap and hot water, began to shave. Tension broke into laughter all over the room. It's fair to speculate that LSD had something to do with Sadie's early contractions. The fungus, the ergo rye, is the source of LSD and believed by herbalists to induce labor. But this was not an issue. The birth held everyone's attention. Even Tommy, the dog, had sneaked in during the confusion and sat alert in one corner of the room. Sadie did not need an episiotomy. Very early the next morning, Zizo Zcis Zadfrak came through the pass weighing little more than 2 pounds. Brenda caught him and cleared his nose and mouth for his first breath. He was so small that his head looked transparent. A bed was made by the fire. A doctor's visit was arranged, and a few days later, Sadie and Zizo moved to the Fountain of the World. Witnessing human birth grounded us in reality and raised our wonder about mystical mysteries. We all had come into the world thus, and we all would pass from it. Who, in facing these facts, is not odd? Our experimentation with psychedelics was brazen. We took to them, but lacked any traditional rituals of preparation. Unadulterated LSD, while harmless to the body, could kill a personality. All of the thoughts that make up the you that you think you are might dissolve as you see yourself in the universe of worlds around you. But one of the drawbacks to this quick consciousness was that there was so much going through your brain that what might come out your mouth could sound like burble. In the 2 years I'd seen Charlie take psychedelics, he was the sanest, most stable person in any group. His prosecutor would speculate and then claim as fact that Charlie issued LSD to each of us, while secretly refraining from taking it so he could program and control us. We took acid separately and together, so whoever had the stash issued it. And I don't think Charlie's ability to program and control would have been hindered by LSD. But here's what he said. Spirit is a power that can't be controlled. I don't move it. The 2 ways to lose it are when I try to use it, and when I fear and fight against it. I was prone to fearing and fighting against it. On some acid trips, I was conscious of everything in and around me. On others, I was unable to do anything but lie down and die, tumbling into alternate realities and psychological black holes. The intense experiences were full of meaningful moments, such as ordinary consciousness did not often perceive, but there were heights and depths that I didn't want to endure. Charlie's calm and confidence kept us above madness, except for one night when we shut him out and tore the house apart. In the aftermath, almost no one spoke of it, but when we did, we called it the freakout. It started with more and stronger acid than we usually took. There were a lot of us in the house that night, including a young surfer from Malibu, and a hippie or 2 left from the group that went to Oregon. Brenda had decorated with cushions and tapestries. Paul was playing a sitar. It seemed to set everyone off. The sound of its strings vibrated my view to eerie distortions, and I had to lie down. Apparently others did also. The surfer kid began to flinch and kick. His foot struck the side of my head, and I went out of ordinary consciousness. I saw a lot of fire images that night. At one point, I felt alarming combustion building. There was going to be an explosion. I thought it was atomic. A major dialogue of the day concerned world leaders who threatened to bomb each other's civilizations into oblivion. I heard crackling and smelled smoke and burning hair. Suddenly, I was in a 1940s-style kitchen beside an open oven that had been blackened by fire. I was lying on my back, looking up into the face of a policeman who was holding me. I was about 3 years old, and by his expression, I was dead. Sandy. I was sitting on a couch, feeling stiff. As I watched others unravel, I became more aware of my own inhibitions and my calculating mind. I was wishing, too, I could let go and scream or cry or go nuts like others were. Lynn. The surfer was tromping around the house calling "Grandfather, Grandfather," and answering in the voice of an old man. Sandy. I heard that Charlie had left. According to him, people dressed him in an old coat and sent him away. Paul was trying to be sexy and macho. Kim was fighting the Vietnam War. Once, when I went outside, I saw the house dancing side to side, like in a cartoon. Energy sparks shooting from the glowing house. It was alive. I remember different hells. One was between places, neither here nor there. An airport parking lot, or strangers posing as friends, coming from somewhere they don't remember, fumble in pockets and purses for keys, undecided as to where they are going or why. In another hell, I was being thrown on my back against the four walls of a small square room, each wall in succession. It was painfully jarring in my head. The walls were giant playing cards. After what seemed like years, I became conscious that I was living the same sequence over and over. It felt like some sort of breakthrough, but I didn't know what it meant or if I could ever get out of it. Lynn was outside in the woodpile next to the house, flipping and flailing. I don't know who got her inside. I remember her lying somewhere, her lips nearly black, her hands and fingers curled up. She was gasping. Water, water, water. But when Bo tried to give her water, she sat up and said plainly, "No, let me experience it." Kim came running through the house into the bathroom yelling, "I'm the devil." We could hear banging and crashing as he destroyed the fixtures in there. Someone, they said it was Charlie, was outside the door saying that the police were coming. Instead of sobering up, I pictured comical movie police, the Keystone Cops. I saw the ranch dogs and George and Randy and felt we were real mountain folks. I had a southern Appalachian accent. Paul walked across the room with his dick in his hand, asking, "Can we make love first?" Snake began to chant, "Everybody make love. Everybody make love." I heard chatter about going to jail, and then, "Jail? Look at us. We won't go to jail. They'll take us to the crazy ward." Gypsy laughed and interjected, "At least we'll all be together." I found that comforting. When I opened my eyes, I saw Clem and Leslie sitting cross-legged, seeming calm and happy. Leslie was rocking side to side, saying bloop, 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 in time to her rocking. A small skittish cat, nearly a kitten, walked by. It usually stayed outside because it was afraid of people. In a routine manner, Ruth picked it up by the scruff and tossed it into the embers of a low-burning fire. A moment later, she plucked it out, dusted it off, and set it on the floor. Sandy. The next day, slowly putting the house back together, energy was scattered. A clump of people seemed to be in a semi-daze, not sure where they should be or what they should do. Lynn was lying on the floor with cuts and scratches and tangled hair. She was a mess. Lynn. Every part of my body ached and appeared swollen to almost twice its size. Worse, I had a horrible feeling of emptiness. Brenda was clearing debris with typical efficiency, seeming indifferent, yet registering something just short of disgust when sweeping near me. Sandy came with a bowl of warm, soapy water and a washcloth, and without any greeting, inquiry, or explanation, she began washing my hands and face and brushed my knotted hair. That was surreal. Sandy. About visions. It's all one's mind. Collective unconsciousness. Some visions are traumas lodged in subconscious minds and pushing to come out. They may come out symbolically in visions. I think the shrink that came closest to seeing that was young. Did you ever see Hieronymus Bosch paintings of hell and purgatory? Those are visions in terms of medieval Christian culture, like Dante's Inferno. In the 1900s, the Spanish artist Dali and the artist Magritte painted visions of machine sterility. In music, Beethoven painted his personal coming to one in his Ninth Symphony. We're in Christian thought. Many cultures' depictions of monsters are just aspects of our human psyche. American Indian cultures have visions of one's life purpose, such as a warrior or shaman. It's hard for me to transcend my own conditioning. I don't know Muslim culture, haven't been to Egypt in thought, and don't understand Japan or China except that they are dying of pollution, like the rest of the world that's in the money. Sandra Good, 1971, letter from LA Women's Jail. After the freak-out, ranch life resumed and the spirit came back. But I don't think anyone who was there forgot that trip. The cat Ruth had tossed in the fire was unhurt, but totally changed. Overnight it became people-friendly, and it never grew. Half-grown, it never got bigger. Most of us moderated our use of LSD and natural plant psychedelics, but we didn't stop taking them. Whatever they had to tell us, whatever they prompted our minds to tell us, we wanted to know. We were learning to walk with birth and death, to surrender the past in exchange for the present, to be spiritually renewed, like the body is healed by life's powerful will to survive. One afternoon, I caught sight of Brenda sewing in a field at the edge of the woods. She was so like her surroundings that I almost missed her. Brenda hand-sewed clothes, well-fitting, artistic, and functional clothes, with pockets and patches. Ever since she had shown us her freehand embroidery, we women had been stitching the pictures of our lives on Charlie's vest, each of us taking a turn. Then we began making separate patches to apply to the vest so that more of us could work together. Embroidering was relaxing, engendering focus. It led us from conscious thought into unconscious imagination, and back to conscious exactitude. Katie's work was delicate and florid. Cappy had exchanged her color pens for threads. passed through all of our hands and minds, the bland material became vibrant in waterways, plants, sky, land, symbols, animals, and people. It was one flowing work of 12 or 10 women, and Charlie said he didn't miss a stitch. He called us witches. And as our visions became reality, reality became magical. The wild woods lifted spells cast by purveyors of merchandise and ideas. We were born every morning and died each night. Our faces lost age. Police suspected us of being minors. People couldn't tell some of us apart, and some thought we were natural-born family. But in the era of hippies, there were hundreds of families. That's what closely knit communal groups were called. A towering, muscular figure, bare but for cut-off jeans, galloped a white horse past a group of us girls in George's front yard, raising the dust in our faces. Just short of the haystack, he reined the animal's neck around and kicked it a gallop past us again. Then he drew back the reins so far the horse reared like silver under the Lone Ranger. The horse was big, but the rider dwarfed it, and though his eyes were blue and his bare skin freckled, he was deeply tanned and had high Indian cheekbones. In a mock show of caballero pride, back stiffened, nostrils flaring, he made the horse prance by tapping its flanks with his heels while reining it tightly. As it bucked and danced unpredictably, he sidled towards us, facing us to step back. Looking down on us, his mouth began to smirk and pucker, as if trying to contain a joke that finally burst into cynical laughs. With a thick Spanish accent, he introduced himself. A long string of names beginning with Juan. He said things only he understood, snickering with each cryptic quip. Then he said he would see us again, and galloped away. Pearl had hired the new cowboy, and she would hire several others, taking them on at room and board, even when George questioned the cost and the need for more help. She argued that she needed extra hands to castrate the stallion, or that one of the other cowboys was in some way debilitated, or that just out of human decency, some people should be helped until they get on their feet. And George always relented. Dodie was the withered woman Pearl installed in an old trailer out back of the movie set. When I first saw Dodie, my inclination to speak was checked. Her fierce eyes narrowed and threatened, "Stay away." The next day I passed Dodie's trailer. A rusty wired fence surrounded it. Nobody bothered her. She lived there 2 or 3 months and was barely seen. Her closest neighbor, Randy Starr, complained that her trailer smelled bad, and when the county finally took her out of it, they discovered something like 29 cats and kittens confined inside with her. Each time someone new came to live on the ranch, there was a little jostle of adjustment, a change in the overall balance of human relations. One day it would be clear that Pearl was recruiting forces to oppose us. At the time, though, it was simply more in the many, and everyone who stayed found a place and a purpose, even Brooks. Brooks had insisted on staying without invitation. He was not unlikable. He was just physically and emotionally thin, pale, almost transparent. He consisted of skin and bones, which, together with a long pointed nose, gave him the exaggerated look of a caricature. Like the rest of us, Brooks needed to work himself out, and whether because Charlie suggested it, or because he found a place to volunteer, he pitched in, shoveling manure out of the barn. It was help of which the cowboys may have taken unfair advantage, but certainly welcomed, and it's where Brooks got to know his physical opposite, Juan. Juan was of Irish and Panamanian descent. I thought he was bilingual, but I never heard him speak Spanish. During the time that we knew him, his English was both more and less broken, depending upon the subject matter and to whom he was speaking. And I didn't know if Juan had been in Vietnam, but he told Brenda that he had nightmares about the war. She told me only one thing about their conversations. She had asked him why he was so angry, and he told her that he was angry at himself, and it had to do with the war. Post-traumatic stress disorder was a technical term back then. If it applied to Juan, his condition was not recognized by the military, nor would he ask for help. I thought he was probably caught in a cultural crossfire, taught both to sacrifice himself like Jesus and to fight like a man. I thought he would have been ashamed either to have participated in the war or to have avoided it. But that's just what I thought. Brenda sat and listened to him and didn't judge him when he cried. Our work at the front of the ranch effectively paid rent on the farmhouse. The public restrooms got cleaned, fences mended, and barn chores done with less stress. Brooks's contribution alleviated some of the pressure on the other guys, but if others were like me, they didn't stop to thank him, and maybe we should have. We all could have thanked each other more, but at the time, the words were unnecessary. Most of us were doing chores of our own. Brooks was not timid, but he was quiet. And one day while on LSD, he quietly tried to die. That day stretched into 4 or 5 days, during which he lay a catatonic on a couch at the back of the farmhouse, and would not be stirred by coaxing, and not even his own urinary and colonic emissions could. The girls had to diaper him. Finally, as I heard it, Charlie told Brooks that it had to stop, and he instructed the girls to put the vest we were embroidering for him under Brooks. "You've been cleaning up shit for us," he reportedly said. "I guess we gotta clean it up for you. But if you're gonna shit, you'll have to shit on my vest. And you know how much I love this vest." This story has been satirized by strangers, but contrary to their assertions, I doubt that anybody considered what Charlie did to be a miracle, as much as an example of his understanding of psychology. In any case, the vest remained unsoiled. Brooks was soon up, relieving and reconstituting himself, like the rest of us. New starts now. We got to look at all the bad thoughts, fears, and doubts in order to pick out the good. When we see the worst in us, then we can decide what we want to be like. Look at the mean and be willing to experience it. Then walk gently through it. One sunny day, I heard a commotion outside, and Pearl came into George's house looking traumatized. From the doorway, I saw 2 sheriff squad cars in the yard, and 17-year-old Chuck Gray in the back of one of them. A scatter of people who had stopped in their tracks of their daily routines looked stunned. Finally, someone explained to me that Chuck, the son of 2 police officers, had just been arrested for rape. A woman in the first squad car had identified him as the man who had hijacked her at knife point on Santa Susana Pass, not a mile from the ranch, and raped her on the back seat of her car. As shocking as the charge, the woman was almost 60 years old. Murmurs of disbelief and denial failed to pick up momentum. The complacency on Chuck's face announced that he had done the deed. Those of us wondering why, based upon his good looks and access to girls, didn't understand rape. Chuck went away and didn't come back. In less than 4 months, our numbers had increased by more than a dozen. I loved almost everything about living on the ranch, but suddenly everyone was talking about leaving it. Cappy said her grandmother had a cabin in the mountains above Death Valley, and her family didn't use it more than once a year. She had vacationed there since childhood, and said that for all the desert lacked, it had plenty of space for us to spread out and explore. I didn't want to go. Sandy. The day before a bunch of us left for the desert, I was on horseback by the back ranch house, and I volunteered to carry a big cardboard box full of dishes down Lover's Lane to George's house. Someone lifted the box up to me, and as I placed it on the saddle in front of me, the contents rattled. The horse spooked, and I fell to the ground with the box on top of me. The impact injured part of my lower back. The next day, Halloween, we set out in the big green school bus. I was relieved to be able to lie down in the back, and as usual, I tried to get some sleep. I didn't know where we were going, except to Cappy's grandmother's, and Cappy seemed proud to be taking us there. After about 2 hours of travel, she wanted us to see the spectacular view of the whole Panamint Valley as we drove over the pass between the Slate and Argus mountain ranges. When we got off the asphalt onto a dirt road and came to a small collection of wood and adobe buildings, she introduced us to Ballarat, a once booming mining town. Inside one building was a little store and cafe counter, but many of the buildings had been whittled by high winds to nubs, and the permanent population of Ballarat was 3. I think a few of us bought candy bars, and then, as we continued on the uneven dirt road along the edge of the mountains, Cappy identified the canyons that sliced through the Panamint Range with names like Surprise Canyon, Happy Canyon, Coyote Canyon, and Jail Canyon. At some point, the ruggedness of the road really communicated to my sore body, and I was relieved when we had to stop several times to check the gear that was starting to come loose from the top of the bus. I got out and wandered around an alluvial fan at the mouth of a canyon. You don't want to be in these canyons when it rains, Cappy warned, unless you want to die. There's a reason they're called washes. During brief torrential rains, water quickly rises and floods the canyons, carrying rocks and even heavy boulders with terrific speed, and splaying them fan-like at the bottom. I began picking up smaller rocks and showing them to Charlie. He showed me an ordinary brownish-gray rock like thousands of others I wouldn't have noticed. And he said, "Look at the swirls of rust overlapping the browns. Look here on this side. See the blue? Beauty is where you can see it, but people learn not to look." Walking back to the bus, Charlie said, "Levels of life are without end, but if you rush through it, you miss it." Finally, the bus came to the base of a mountain cleaved by a jagged gorge. Goler Wash. It was too rocky and steep for the bus to go farther, so we got out for the 7-mile trek up the mountain through the wash, the first part of a long foot journey to Cappy's grandmother's. Some of us carried bundles of bedding and clothing, pots and pans, heavy bags of dried grains and other food staples like coffee, salt, and peanut butter. Snake and I lagged behind the ragtag procession as it staggered upward, Snake tootling on a little flute. I hung back even behind her, hoping Charlie would notice that I was hurting from the fall off the horse and give me some acknowledgement. The desert was like being on another planet. As my mind adapted, I would see shapes, textures, and colors I'd never known could exist in mineral form. At the top of the wash, the land smoothed into valleys and rounded hills. After half an hour's walk between them, we passed the cluster of buildings Cappy said was the Barker Ranch. And a 1/4 mile farther, cottonwood and fig trees announced the Myers Ranch built by Cappy's grandfather in the 1930s. Near the house were outbuildings and a stone and concrete swimming pool. Above it, a natural spring saturated the slopes, giving life to wild mint and alkaline-loving plants and bushes. The high mineral content of the water showed in crusty deposits all over the ground. In the purple dusk, the only sounds were of nature and the soft crunching of our footsteps. We heard owls but didn't see them. Cappy said they were burrowing owls, one of the smallest of all owls, and that, instead of nesting in trees, they made their nests beneath plant roots in the sand. I don't remember going into the cabin. I was sore and tired, and I slept. The next day, Leslie, Gypsy, and I went back to explore the Barker Ranch, which consisted of a stone house and shed, a bunkhouse, outdoor enclosures for livestock, and a small stone swimming pool. The builder had brought in flat stones for the L-shaped porch around the house and different colored desert rocks to make the exterior walls a naturally beautiful mosaic. All the buildings were framed and supported with wooden beams salvaged from an abandoned local railway. There was a big kitchen with cupboards, a sink with a trickle of cold running water, and a little pot-bellied stove. The house had a rudimentary, waterless bathroom, a bedroom, and a front room with a sleeping alcove and a stone fireplace. The place was a mess. We swept and got a rattlesnake out of the corner of the kitchen, and a dead lizard out of the sink. Then we washed windows and scores of gallon jars. I was mesmerized by Leslie. Lean and lanky, with a dust rag in hand, she took each desert artifact off its shelf, dusted it and the shelf, and put it back. Leslie had style, and, like Brenda, she could design and make clothes. She was pretty, funny, intelligent, and always friendly. She always had a self-effacing manner. I thought it was because she was tall and pretty like a model, and maybe was used to girls being jealous of her, so she literally lowered herself. At the ranch, she became Lulu, and fell right into mountain talk. It seemed Charlie thought of Leslie as Bobby's girl, and maybe that's why he didn't give her the attention she seemed to want from him. Anyway, she took good care of herself and others, and nearly always showed enthusiasm and a desire to please. In the desert, we had just a few items of clothing, including socks. Leslie went through each drawer of the old dressers, rounding up clothes and dozens of socks, most of which didn't match. She mended some, washed and dried everything, and carefully refolded each item and put it back in the cleaned and freshly lined drawers. It gave me a good feeling to see her do that. Between Leslie and Brenda, we always had fresh, clean clothes. I loved watching these women get to work, putting order and attractiveness into a place. Many of the girls did this every place we went. It's a trait passed down through generations, but some women never get it. I never wanted to be in the kitchen if my mother was there. Once, she said to me, while clutching a knife, "Get out of here before I kill you." Different ones of us traveled to and from the desert through the autumn and winter, at least one of us staying with George. Winter temperatures in San Fernando Valley were in the 50s and 60s, but only a trickle of people came to rent horses. An unusually popular weekend might bring 10 rentals, but ordinarily 10 was a high number for the entire week. And some weeks there were no rentals at all. George worried. I thought it was just a bad habit, but he finally told me that he owed $3,000 to $5,000 in back property taxes and penalty payments. He could lose the ranch. It shamed him. He said that even when the business was not paying for itself, the horses had to eat.